rolling into our next program, which will wind up our seminar for the day, Rising Risks, How to Identify and Stay Ahead of Emerging Threats. Joining us today is Michael Ballard, Director of Intelligence with Global Guardian. Michael has an extensive background in intelligence, being a former lead intelligence analyst for North America region at United Health Group, and he manages Global Guardian's intelligence network with international partners. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a big job. His experience extends also to operations, crisis management, cyber analysis expertise. Let me take just a moment and tell you about Global Guardian. Global Guardian is one of the true global leaders in travel risk mitigation. They moved quickly into people risk mitigation and also now in terms of facility risk mitigation and of course your customer risk mitigation. They do it all from policy creation, travel programs, people programs, facility safety and security programs, but these are also the people that when you have people traveling on your behalf for business, these are the folks you want to have a relationship with because they can guide you not just how to stay out of trouble when it happens, but to solve these challenges when they do happen, like a kidnapping, ransom, or civil unrest in an area. So I really want everybody to understand the breadth and scope that Global Guardian brings to the table today. It's a remarkable organization. We've been fortunate to have a lengthy relationship with them, and we're privileged to have Michael join us today. Please welcome Michael Ballard.
Thanks, Stephen, for that warm welcome. So as Stephen mentioned, we're talking about security, physical security primarily here, but the threats landscape has certainly evolved in the last couple of years. You saw kind of, a drop in crime overall in the beginning of COVID, but then it's really kind of expanded, right? So you're looking at, levels, even though murders have fallen, for example, in major cities in 2022 compared to 21, they're still very high, very well above where they were in 2019. So we're still seeing a lot of homicides related to gang violence, right? Drug trafficking, still a major issue. A lot of that is tied back also to, in Mexico, for example, we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in the homicide rate, levels of violence. That's not going away, right? And a lot of the violence that's going on there ends up in the U.S. because you have the same types of battles over territory. Drug overdoses still a major issue, so you still have a lot of crime going on. Same thing with robberies, and then motor vehicle theft was actually a really big one that we noticed from COVID. Was Grand Theft Auto was massively increased. Folks weren't using their cars as much, sitting around. So, we're really looking at a big spike in crime. And, unfortunately in the US, you do have an issue with gun violence, right? A lot of mass shootings, 71 mass shootings just this year. Maybe even ahead of that, but really tragic. But that is the reality that we're living with in the US right now. You've got a lot of folks dealing with some mental health issues. You've got easy access to weapons, to firearms, whether that's legal or illegal. And, the stat here, I think that sticks out to me also is that, 1 in 5 folks around the world, probably higher in the US, have experienced some form of violence or harassment in their place of work, whether that's going to be from coworkers or the general public, right? So that's definitely a big issue. Next slide. So when we're thinking about what does this all mean for us, it's about how can we manage those risks, manage those threats, and it's not going to be a single solution, right? For us, we're looking at how can we combine the immediate response of a physical, a security guard, a physical officer, with technology, with access control, with AI that can help look at, is this a real person? Is this a raccoon walking by? Is this a tree branch, right? So that if you're managing an alarm system, you're not getting overwhelmed overwhelmed with what's going on. And all this is going to vary, of course, based on where these buildings are, their size, their location, right? Looking at the threat environment of the immediate area. Is it a higher crime area? Do you have statistics on when most crimes are perpetrated? Do you have, right, is it seasonal? Right, we often see a spike in violence in the summer months. So those are some things that we're looking at as far as how can we utilize and leverage technology, but also good old fashioned boots on the ground to protect not just people, but also assets and property. Next slide. So when we're looking at what type of solutions are available, we see that most businesses are not going to be aware of all of these, right? There has been focus on the traditional security guard areas, but we think that there's real opportunity to sort of have a hybrid approach to all this, right? So if you've got, a crisis going on and you need to call the police, maybe they're dealing with something else, maybe they are dealing with budget issues. There's been pretty high turnover in police forces in the last several years. A lot of folks retiring, a lot of folks opting not to continue and just retire and look elsewhere. So that could be an issue. And then as far as, the traditional incident notification, we see that as kind of obsolete, right? So you can't just have a security camera with no one watching it, or if you do, you need some sort of analytics, right? A guy at a desk staring at a video feed, he's probably going to be looking at his phone. He's probably going to be distracted by something. You want to have some type of AI driven analytics that's going to be working in tandem with that camera system. And then as far as access control, you really want to make sure that all of your ways into not just physical locations, but all of your ways into networks are all synced up, are being monitored for unauthorized intrusions, unauthorized access to those buildings, offices, supply centers, etc. Next slide. So when we're talking about kind of the pros and cons of utilizing actual, a physical guard, there are obviously both, right? One of the main con kind of is that they are expensive. They are not 100% reliable or dependent, right? They're not a camera that's always recording or a software system that's working 24/7. You do have high turnover rate. You do have issues with maybe some folks aren't going to show up. Maybe they don't tell you when they're not going to show up. Maybe they just disappear and never come back to the job. There are also a lot of questions about if a security officer were to use force, lethal or otherwise, how does that affect the company, either legally or through their reputation? That varies state by state, so always good to know about what the laws and rules are about concealed weapons carry, CCW licenses, and whether folks are sort of authorized or licensed to be security guards. But there are some significant pros, right? They can respond immediately. They are right on site, right? They're also a pretty significant deterrent. Some folks may see a camera and think, well, maybe that's just a fake camera. Maybe it's not real. Maybe I can try and skirt around it. But if they see a security guard, walking laps, doing loops, seeing, checking out everything, that's going to be definitely a deterrent. They're right there on site. They can respond, immediately. You're not waiting on the police. You're not waiting for someone to get out of bed in the middle of the night and drive to the site and take a look, right? They're right there. So there are some definitely some advantages. They can also handle a lot of any type of on-site tasks that are required, right? A camera is not going to be able to do. If there are maintenance issues, if there's, you want someone who's working late, you want them to, they want to be walked to their car in the parking garage, right? A camera maybe isn't going to provide that same level of security that having, your guard walk them to their car is going to provide. So there are pros and cons with this. Next slide. And then, why we recommend sort of a hybrid approach is because there is no on-site security guards, and purely cameras are not going to be are not going to be 100% solution. You really need the hybrid. So when you're looking at camera monitoring, remote monitoring, what's the advantage there? Well, less expensive typically. You've got 24/7 surveillance. You have typically an AI-based backed analytics. So it's constantly learning from what it's seeing. You give it certain inputs, things to ignore, so that your own security center or a company like Global Guardian is not kind of overwhelmed with false alarms, that we're, able to focus our attention on something when it's a real incident. Someone's opened a door when they shouldn't, someone's broken a window, someone's in an area where they shouldn't be or when they shouldn't be there, right? You can set up different time limits, different time zones to figure out, when you want to actually monitor. You can also cover a really large surface area with cameras, right? So you can have multiple cameras set up and cover an area that a single guard may not have, literally is not going to have eyes on that same amount of space. So, for us, the remote monitoring, the cameras are really valuable. We've actually had incidents where we can, what we do call a talk down. So we see someone who's at a dealership parking lot after hours. They shouldn't be there. It's 2 a.m. on a Saturday. We see someone in the parking lot. Maybe they're about to steal a car, right? Maybe there's no guard there, but we see them. We can say, hey, this is private property. You're here. You're trespassing. You need to leave right now. And we can actually, speak into a microphone, and there are speakers tied to those cameras, right? So same kind of thing. There are some cons to this, of course. If it's just, alone, remote monitoring alone, it gets vulnerable to access control circumvention. That can be an issue with some, sophisticated threat actors. And, trying to set up cameras to cover every single blind spot, I think, as we note, that's not really cost effective, but, you can cover quite a large area. And the main issue with just remote monitoring is that you can't physically stop someone with a camera, right? And you can't physically respond to a fire or an accident or something like that immediately, right? So having that guard in conjunction for us is really the way forward. Next slide. Yeah, so as mentioned, sort of the hybrid model, right? So for us, we like to have, with clients, they're going to have typically a security guard on site during the day, because that tends to be when most bad stuff happens, as far as, an active shooter situation, an armed robbery, anything that's going to be putting employees or customers at risk is typically going to happen during normal business hours, right? If it's, 3 a.m, you don't necessarily need the security guard there, and staffing for that time is more difficult overnights. You also have issues with, physical security guards maybe dozing off or just not doing, exactly what they're supposed to be. The cameras don't fall asleep, right? The cameras don't get distracted. They're, 24/7. So for us, it's really about this hybrid model where you can combine the best of both worlds. You help cover kind of the blind spots, so to speak, of each system. You have these real-time capabilities. You can provide, directions to employees in case of an emergency. You've got better security coverage of your actual site. The cameras allow us, or you guys as a company or as a firm, to have, awareness of what's going on during an incident via the camera. You don't necessarily need, right? If a security guard is there responding to something, you're not going to necessarily need to call him up and say, hey, what's going on there? We hear there's something going on. What's happening? We're actually going to be able to see it. You guys are going to be able to see it through those cameras. So for us, it's a win-win. And, the camera monitoring also in case of a criminal incident, those recordings, those cameras are valuable information and evidence, right? And in any type of criminal investigation. So for us, it's a win-win there. Next slide. And then when you're looking at how to pick a security provider, and this can be a little bit tricky because, different companies are licensed or authorized to operate in different states, and the vetting process can be a little bit daunting. You want to make sure, right, that their insurance is up to snuff, that they have proper contracts in place with any third-party vendors that they may be using, right, whether that's off-duty law enforcement or licensed security guards. There are some nightmare scenarios out there where you hire somebody who, say they have a concealed carry license, but it's about to expire. They forget to renew it. They discharge their weapon in the course of the job. Something happens, right? All of a sudden, that's a big problem. So you want to really make sure that the team, the company that you work with for these solutions is really, dots every I and crosses every T, and that they're constantly looking at what's out there as far as technology. How can we leverage it? How can we use it to supplement the physical security? What does their training schedule look like? How do they, right? Do they offer, evasive driving training to folks who are kind of static security guards who maybe want to branch out? Do they have that really thorough capability? So for us, that's kind of really important is picking the right security provider there. Next slide. And I would say from summarizing this and looking forward is that we don't see the threat landscape in the U.S. or outside the U.S. really getting any better. What we've seen trend wise with the economies of different countries, inflation here in the U.S., abroad, the drug issue, right? All of these sort of threat vectors are not going away. I don't want to be too doom and gloom, but it's a persistent threat, right? So that's number one. Number two, from what we've seen and what folks on this call may have experienced, is that first responders, especially abroad, are not necessarily equipped to handle every type of situation, every threat situation. And with all of the cameras that we have now on folks, phones, smartphones, just recording everything, folks are maybe a little bit more hesitant to take certain actions just because of the risk of politicization. So that kind of ties into number three here, as far as first responder policy restrictions, but also just general staffing, right? If you're an EMT, they work crazy hours, they deal with a lot of crazy people, and they probably are underpaid for that, right? So staffing there is an issue. Number four is sort of what I've been hammering this whole time, is that technology itself is not the answer, just like a physical guard or a physical response is not the answer 100%, right? You need to have that hybrid model. On my side, where I deal with travel security frequently, folks will say, hey, I'm going to I'm going to Monterrey, Mexico. What do I need to know? What's been going on there, right? I can provide them all the intelligence in the world. I can let them know about Los Zetas and the Gulf Cartel and extortion and security forces when they try and arrest a cartel leader. You have gunfights all over the city and burning vehicles, and 18-wheelers get carjacked and all that. But if there's no so what behind that, if there's no here's our recommendation and here's how we can help, then it's kind of useless. So for us, the technology is the same way. We love the tech, but you need to have something behind it. And as far as static guards, the best guards, the most experienced, best trained, sort of best tempered, right, who know how to stay calm in a stressful situation, they're typically bodyguards for C-suite folks, for celebrities working sensitive areas. So if you're sort of these rent-a-cop type solutions, you kind of get what you pay for with folks who are sort of just paid to walk around, right? So that's fine from a budget perspective, but you really need to augment that, we think, with technology. And finally is that, for us internally, the way that we train and vet all of the folks that we use for our emergency response in the US and both abroad, there's a lot of training that goes into that. We have teams that fly all over the place to sort of train these teams that we use in Mexico, Brazil, elsewhere, and train them up. So with that, I will relinquish it back to Stephen.
Hey, Michael, thank you very much. Very insightful information. I have a quick question if you have just a minute to hang.
Sure.
You talked about what I found to be a very cool innovation, which is the remote concept, but including the remote narration or the remote voice activated. Are you finding, now my first perception of that is, okay, that will work well when there's active surveillance going on from the remote device. And you may have said this and perhaps I missed it, but maybe not. But are you finding with AI that these remote devices can activate the narration themselves in certain situations?
Yeah, that's not something that I have personally encountered. It wouldn't surprise me given the advances that we have, ChatGPT and some of these, deep fake technology, right, to imitate someone's voice. Wouldn't surprise me if that's something that is out there. But, at least the way that we do it is, if we have the remote monitoring on a car dealership, for example, like I mentioned, and we see someone walking across with, what looks like a crowbar or a tire, a car jack in their hand, we want someone who can talk down to them and say, you're trespassing, get out of here. And if they don't, hey, we're going to call the police. The AI is not going to call the police and be able to, give a description of the suspect and let them know what, exactly where they are, right? So you do need that some level of human oversight and human interaction to make that happen. And I think also if someone were to hear, a computer generated voice tell them, hey, get out of here, they'll probably just ignore it, right? Because they think it's just automated. There's no one actually behind this. I can stay here. They're not, it's just a bluff, right? So for us, there's got to be some level of human oversight and interaction here.
Which validates your premise of the hybrid model. So
yeah, correct. Yeah.
It may happen in the future. So we'll have to stay tuned.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you very much for joining us today. Terrific information.
Absolutely. Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd just like to take one more opportunity to thank our supporters. We've had a terrific program today. I hope everybody got a lot out of it. These programs will be available for viewing after today, so your team members can also watch and learn. But a special shout out to Gray Robinson, Fisher Phillips, the Denny Law Group, and Global Guardian. And of course, to our speakers, Alexis, Ted, David, and Michael. Thank you all. We look forward to the next time. We will be in touch. Bye for now.